All right, so today on IT Trendsetters, we have Shamla from Netskope. So Shamla, can you give us a little bit about your background?
So thank you for having me. I have been a longtime technologist. I spent 39 years in various technology roles. I currently have a number of roles in my portfolio. I'm an adjunct law professor. I teach topics in technology, innovation, and cybersecurity. I also am on a couple of public and private company boards, and I work for Netskope as the head of cloud strategy and innovation.
Awesome.
One of the things that's really funny, though, is not funny, but it challenges all these contracts that people have with business partners and clients, and how they're written today may not be consistent with what they really need going forward, potentially for breaches and ransomware and all these things that are happening. So, do you have any, from the boardroom perspective, what would you say people should be aware of around contracts with business partners and third-party risk and third-party contracts?
When we ask questions about that in the boardroom, really we're thinking about it from a 20,000-foot view.
Right.
The detail of what's in each contract and who does what and how they do it and what you're liable for, etc., doesn't actually get into the boardroom.
Right.
So what we're looking at there is holistic risk management, strategic risk management, and what's material to this company at this point in time. And so the conversation about who should be reviewing your contracts really is deferred to the management.
Okay.
And so your general counsel should guide on those. But the most important thing on contracts, especially in a business environment that is accelerating and it's so dynamic, is to review contract language, contract terms on a regular basis. And so one of the key things you want to do is you really don't want to lock yourself into long-term contracts.
Okay.
You want to give yourself the opportunity to go back, renegotiate terms, add and change as you need, because the business environment is changing, the regulatory environment is changing, and so we're all trying to coexist, and it's very difficult to coexist in that environment without having the opportunity to augment those terms.
Okay.
And to do it quickly, and to do it often.
Right. Yep.
Because just the administration alone is a huge burden.
Yep.
And then there's the liability. And if I didn't sign up for liability at one point in the contract, I'm not going to want to just allow this to happen.
Correct.
Right? I'm going to want to enforce my terms.
Right.
You're going to want to enforce your terms.
Right. Exactly.
And so where do you actually find common ground?
Right. Reasonable risk terms.
And you're going to have to pay me more to take on more risk.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Or you're going to have to give me, some latitude elsewhere.
Right.
And so this is a lot of negotiation that needs to happen.
Yep.
And so you really want to set yourself up with contract terms that allow you a natural place to do that. So short-term contracts are necessary. The opportunity to augment and change are necessary. And I would put things in contracts like, when the regulation changes or the law changes, that the contract will automatically come up for renewal and change.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So when you're saying, are we talking like annual renewals every couple of years? What do you think is a realistic time frame?
I think annual is probably the minimum I would do.
Okay.
Because it takes a lot of administration, and it's a costly affair, especially if you hire outside counsel to negotiate your contracts.
Right.
Even if you have a legal team, you have to be judicious with your resources. So I would say a year is probably the minimum I would go.
Okay. What's the most aggressive you've seen? I guess point in time you'd mentioned where something changed, like a law or something. That's one thing, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I would do. I would say at a minimum 1 year we review the terms of the contract, and then as and when the regulatory environment dictates that change is needed.
Okay.
So suddenly, if there's a new cybersecurity law, and it changes fundamentally what we do and how we do it and how often we need to do it, we should automatically and naturally create those exits out of contracts so that you can renegotiate the terms without creating too much of that administration burden.
Right, and then you throw in some of the privacy laws on top of that, and you're going to be, you should be in the legal business probably, It seems like that's...
Right now, I think all businesses seem to be on a collision course because you've got people claiming privacy rights, and those of us who are providing services are attempting to give them what they want and what the law requires. And then as you just set up an infrastructure to perform on your obligations, then the obligations changes. So you got too many dynamic components in the equation. And so you almost need everyone to be willing to renegotiate, to discuss, to debate, and to be somewhat flexible, because this is not science. This
Right.
is art
Right.
at its
exactly.
best.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And so, I always say this, when the denominator changes, everything changes.
Yep.
And that denominator for us right now is the regulatory environment.
Yep.
So you got privacy rules, you got cybersecurity rules, you got technology rules.
Correct.
And now we've got even rules around artificial intelligence and
Right.
kind of how we write our algorithms.
Yep.
So it takes a village to meet all the obligations, where we all still want to innovate. We want to go fast.
When you talk about the artificial intelligence, is this rules like having to explain how your artificial intelligence is working, or is it other types of factors?
The good news in that is I think a lot of organizations are coming together to have conversations about the ethics of artificial intelligence,
Yep.
not just the operations and the technology, but how do you make decisions?
Yep.
And, what are the downsides for society?
Yep. Well, Facebook's a great example, right? Just last news recently.
Absolutely. And so, the common request right now is, well, I want to know how those algorithms are set up. Well, it's not as simple as that.
No.
It's not like you can isolate that and say, well, let me show you what the algorithm does.
Right.
Because artificial intelligence, by its very nature, learns from itself.
Correct.
And as it learns, typically your algorithm is going to adapt and change.
Right.
And so what you teach your algorithms at the beginning will continue to remain for as long as you run those kinds of technologies.
Right.
And so it's really important that people understand what they're asking for. Okay?
Point in time, almost, right?
And artificial intelligence doesn't work in that point in time.
Right.
Because you take knowledge that you know,
Yep.
you add knowledge that you don't know, and you create new knowledge.
Right.
And that just becomes a cycle of how these algorithms work.
Right.
So it's important, I think, for us to trust the people developing the algorithms so that, when we talk about ethics, we need to trust them to make decisions that are good for society, that are good for mental health and well-being, that are just good for the technology, that are good for business.
Right.
And so, there's a lot of ethical decisions that need to be made.
Right.
And it's not only that the technology needs to be transparent, decision-making needs to be transparent. None of these can operate in a black box.
Right. And this kind of leads into Netskope. And I imagine where you're applying algorithms all the time to try and detect security incidents and adaptive learning and allowing people to function without having too many false positives. Any comments on how that all goes and how you guys take that philosophy?
The good news on cybersecurity, though, is that when you have traffic, we've been doing this for decades. We've been taking traffic, analyzing them, and finding the insights in the traffic, right? And typically, in the past, this was a lot of let me look for something, let me apply a rule, and let me find the anomaly. And it was, let me look at something, let me decide whether I should block it or I should allow it.
Right.
And the challenge with that is the world has changed.
Right.
And we want, when we think about the boardroom, we want flexibility.
Yep.
And we want speed.
And risk management. Right.
And we want risk management, but we want risk management in shades of gray,
Right.
not in black and white.
Exactly.
And typical cybersecurity tooling operated in black and white. And we got away with it for a long time
Right.
because we didn't have a good alternative.
Right.
Today, when you introduce artificial intelligence and you introduce analytics, you have so much more data than you ever had, and you have the opportunity in the innovation to actually look for and to customize results. So when you talk about adaptive, it's the classic in AI,
Right.
right? You take old knowledge, you take new knowledge, you add it, you create even newer knowledge.
Right.
And you look for the insights that are embedded in the data that us as humans couldn't possibly connect the dots on
Right.
at the speed that's needed.
Right. Yep.
Okay? So, when we think about it at Netskope, I think the data analytics is a very powerful component of the platform because it just doesn't do, let me block or let me allow.
Yep.
It says, let me block in ways that work for this particular situation. And let me allow in ways that work in other situations. And every person can have different needs.
Right.
Every business has different needs at different times. And every time you get into that situation, you don't want to be reconfiguring. You don't want to be re-implementing technology.
Right.
You really want your technology to adapt
Right.
with you
Yep.
and give you better business outcomes.
So with COVID, I think is accelerated because it's forced the distributed work at home environment even more. And then you've got SaaS app adoption, a lot of that. You've got public-private cloud, so that puts Netskope right in a great place to be in the middle of all that. Where do you see this all heading, like over the next few years? Where do you think Netskope's value proposition will be, and how will you continue to enhance that over time?
I think the solution at Netskope, because they're giving you a platform to converge multiple cybersecurity kinds of capability and tools, it's a great place to be because we have a war for talent, and we don't have the opportunity or the luxury in cybersecurity today to keep hiring as many people as we need to manage and support disparate technologies. Right? So convergence is the key. And so when you can find one platform that gives you lots of capability and, in one place, using one kind of interface, using one kinds of technology, I think it actually helps you to be judicious with how you're using your resources. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that's really important to me is we all need a place to apply rules, apply policies, inspect traffic, and create this adaptive outcome. And you can only do that if you're born in the cloud.
Yep.
And so one of the things that I like about the platform is it's largely covering cloud workloads, which is where every business is going, where every CEO wants to go, because it gives them business benefits. It gives them opportunities to get things done faster, gives them opportunities to do things in more modern ways, but also to create an environment where ecosystems can come together. And you can leverage each other's capability to create very powerful business outcomes. So business leaders want that environment. On the security side, that creates challenges for us because we want a place where we can inspect the traffic. And that whole perimeter is gone.
Right.
And so the less technology I have that I'm in control of, the more opportunity I have, I think, to do that inspection, to find the place where all my traffic converges in places where I may not control, but I at least need visibility. And the visibility, I think, is what gives cybersecurity leaders a lot more comfort, because then you apply analytics against that visibility that you have, and you determine whether things are anomalous, or if you want to allow, what do you want to block, what do you want to allow, what rules and policies do you want to apply? And we need that place to do it, but it's an environment that we don't own or control. It's on the internet.
Right.
And that's why I think this platform is so powerful. It gives us the opportunity to use our resources in a more judicious way. It gives us that common place to inspect traffic and to apply rules and policies. And I do think that it will become the most important part of our technology stack because many organizations are never going to continue having their own infrastructure, their own network, their own opportunity to create, tools because our workforce is everywhere.
Right.
Our partners are everywhere.
Right.
And we're going to not just hire people in other places, we're going to want to coexist with ecosystems that don't want to connect to our network.
Right.
And be subject to our policies and rules. So I think having that kind of virtual place where that happens in a trusted environment is a big business benefit. And it's a business accelerator.
Do you find yourself in the position to help like third-party connections? So would you use something like yourself or like a CyberArk if you wanted to bring in your supply chain in and out for access to your network? Where do you fit versus someone like that? Or do you overlap or is it converging into one spot?
I would say the more convergence, the better. Here's what's important. When CEOs look at their technology infrastructure, they think it's too complex.
Right.
And, there's data and there's surveys and there's actual studies that demonstrate that more CEOs think the biggest impediment to their ability to accelerate their business is the complex infrastructure.
Yep.
And so if we can remove the complexity of the infrastructure and converge all of this by just having an agent, and you could do it even without an agent. But when you have those convergence points, it accelerates business. And so all of these tooling and all of these technologies are going to have to coexist because we're going to rely on each other to give us the visibility into our blind spots.
Yep.
Right. So
It's incredibly complex, yet trying to take the complexity out and hide it from the operations. It's a big challenge.
And that's why I think these platforms that converge capability, that consolidate solutions are so powerful because, I think consolidation will lead to simplification. Simplification will lead to acceleration of business.
Great.
So I have a question because this is a unique interview. I mean, it's very rare we get kind of the perspective that you're bringing to the table. Usually it's kind of like super nerd to super nerd, just kind of giving away all these acronyms that are way over my head. So let's take off the Netskope hat for 1 second as we wrap up this conversation. Your perspective from kind of the C-level above is very interesting to me. So what advice would you give kind of that C-suite on how to communicate to the board, but also how do you plan at the C-suite level for all of these kind of changes, requirements, and you're talking about making sure your contracts are short and you need a lot of flexibility. When you're in the C-suite at a big enterprise company, how do you play both ends of that? How are you managing that down, and how are you managing that up to your board?
So really interesting question, but a rich question, right? So let me see if I can just simplify it. I think there's a couple of key things. In the boardroom, we're really looking at talent. So the first thing is to make sure you have the right leaders with the right strategy and the right approach to innovation, because that's what fuels our business and our growth. The things that we care about in the boardroom is how do we grow our business? And then the corresponding thing is how do we manage risk in that environment? And I don't mean the technology risk. I don't mean at the very granular level, who is allowed to look at what data. When I think about the risk that the board is managing, they're managing material risk and strategic risk that will actually cause an existential crisis to the business. So when we think about this whole journey of how people are the journey to the cloud, or how people are embracing new technology and innovation, I think we're thinking about it in that context. Can we accelerate our business by embracing those technologies? And then can we manage the risk appropriately in that strategy or roadmap? And so that whole idea of managing risk in the cloud ends up in the boardroom through the opportunity to accelerate our business. Right? And so just remember, when I advise people, I tell them, make sure you're putting your risk topics in the context of material business risk and strategic business risk, so the board can understand how that risk management is not just going to apply, but who is responsible for it in the leadership. Right? Often that gets left to a chief operating officer or chief information officer or chief security officer. It really doesn't matter who has the remit. We have to make sure that you've got the right leader in the right seat making the appropriate decisions to be able to translate that for us into what our role is, which is corporate governance.
Great. I appreciate you coming on IT Trendsetters today. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.